Hey guys, welcome back to the Another Excuse podcast, where we chat to founders, creators, and self-starters about how they started and where they are now. Today's guest is Dan Harding, the founder of Sonorous. Sonorous is a company that helps founders scale their businesses through operations. Dan is really impressive. He's just 24 and he's already achieved quite a lot. In this episode, we discuss how he got into operations and why he loves it so much. We talk about the value of community and surrounding yourself with like-minded individuals. And throughout the episode, Dan shares some really valuable insights and actionable advice. You don't want to miss this episode. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm sure you will too. Enjoy the show. Hey Dan, thanks for joining me today. You've achieved some impressive business results at quite a young age, and I'm excited to get into it all. But to get started, can you give us a bit of background of your journey that got you to where you are today?
Sure. Yeah. I guess I sort of always wanted to be in business. So I started business even while at school, testing different things. Not that anything really worked. But then kept trying things sort of outside of business, outside of school, and had a bit of success here. Had some other massive failures elsewhere, but sort of kept trying things after thing until sometimes we'd make a bit of money, then we'd lose some money. And it just kept progressing. So every time it would get bigger and bigger as we kind of learned more. And then I guess about 4 years ago now, I started my first holding company with a partner. And it was in the US, and it was almost like a marketing company, even though I know nothing about marketing. But I ran the operations of the company and met a few sort of different people over there doing different things. And after meeting, I'm not sure if I'd call them mentors, but they were definitely people who were influential in where my decision making went to get to where I am today. I sort of learned what they were doing. They were all in like the private equity space and the VC space, which is somewhere I never really wanted to go, but I wanted to take the concepts that they had and sort of apply it to what we were doing, which became sort of an acquisition vehicle, but not in that traditional VC private equity sort of area. And it kind of turned the marketing company into that sort of almost acquisition vehicle. So we'd go into companies, we'd take sweat equity, and we would do what we were doing sort of marketing wise. And it was small, but we grew it up over time. And I then started learning more, and eventually, like to cut a really like long period of time short, decided, okay, I'm going to exit that company to the other partner, come back to the UK and start my own, just as me. Ended up having a few partners along the way, but have since come back to just being myself. And it became a version of what we had there in terms of an acquisition vehicle, but just on multiple fronts. So it wasn't just like a marketing front, because I knew nothing about marketing, but it more became, okay, the stuff I knew, which was business operations. How do you go and optimize a company to be as efficient as it can possibly be and grow a company with clarity? And how do you do that, but not take a fee? How do you go and do it as an acquisition vehicle? And now we have grown to where we deploy capital, we go into companies and we do a bunch of different things. But that's kind of how it evolved over time, which is obviously years kind of spanned into a couple of sentences. But
Yeah, and so you touched on it a bit there. Your current company is Sonorous. So could you go into a bit more detail of what exactly Sonorous does and how it all works?
sure. So Sonorous is a holding company, which is kind of a boring term, which I guess people don't always understand what it means. But essentially, Sonorous owns a bunch of other entities. And we go into these companies and we force them to grow, which again is really broad. But how we do that is we break down companies into what they actually are. So we map companies out step by step, and we try to understand every single process, how everything that happens in a business influences the next thing and gets us from point A to point B. And that comes down to not just the traditional sales mapping that people do, but everything that happens before that and after that, how it interacts with the CRMs, how the data moves, how people interact with these different actions, and it defines every process in the business. So we first go in and we build that. And then we sort of map out, okay, well, these are the KPIs that affect these things. This is how we're going to build business intelligence into this. And we become sort of the operator of the business, supporting the founder or the other business owners that are in the business at that time. And we help them to accelerate where they're trying to go to and condense that into a short period of time by just being really, really data driven. And I think data driven became sort of a buzzword at a time, but now it's like a necessity where everything is data driven. So that's why we start with the business mapping, because we map absolutely everything out, where every time something happens in the business, we revisit that map and we go, okay, was this something we built in and predicted? If so, okay, well, this is how we know the data moved, and now we can analyze what actually happened. Or if it's something that's happened for the first time ever, we can build it in, and now it's another scenario that we can track and measure and make sure that when we're looking at these analytics and all the different metrics that are influencing the bigger picture, we can then track the actions that we need to track and put the things in place that we need to put in place to make sure that we're achieving the overall business goals. So we do that for businesses. So we go into businesses, we do that for them, or we traditionally do it for sweat equity. And now we do a combination of that plus capital investments. So we'll go into a business, we'll usually make a capital investment to get a nice chunk of the business. And we'll also do the sweat equity stuff on the side. So then we become, basically, if it's early enough, we become one of the founders. And if it's later enough, we sort of become an arm that can help the founder and become sort of the operator in the company to help them grow.
Great. And it seems pretty complicated and intricate, like what you do. But at the same time, it almost seems like a necessity. Why do you think founders don't focus on a lot of these aspects of the business?
I think it is really complicated and intricate until it's done. So the building of it is a long process. Like, you sit down and you think, it basically becomes a constant if statement. If this happens, what are all the possibilities that can happen next? Where does the data move? How does this interact with this? And how does it contribute towards the overall goal? And sitting down and doing that is something that naturally happens in a business because the process has been established if it's an existing running business. But no one really takes the time to put that on paper and think about it and think, are we just doing these things because it happened by accident, or is it intentional? And how are we influencing all of these different things? And business owners don't traditionally take the time to do that because they're so worried about getting the results. Whereas if you actually sit down and take the time to build that, it can be a little bit slower, but the outcome in the end will always be a million times bigger. So I think it's a couple of reasons that business owners don't do it. It's a time factor. They don't necessarily always see it as worthwhile, or they don't understand how they would get the benefit out of it initially. And the complexity of it is a massive thing to sit down and undertake. And there's usually other things in the business that they want to focus on. So either they don't have the skill sets to do it, or their primary focus is elsewhere.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what motivated you to start a company like this?
It was almost by accident. So my business philosophy is businesses are ecosystems. So I want to look at a business as an ecosystem. I want to see everything that's around this ecosystem. We use business development to do that. So where does things sit on our business development timeline? Like, is it in partnerships? Is it in development? And we look at the ecosystem at all times to do this. And when we started getting into that ecosystem thing and building different businesses that affected everything we were trying to do at like the center of our ecosystem, it became so data driven that we needed to understand everything. And to understand everything, my way of doing that, I'm a very visual person. I wanted to get it on paper. We started drawing out processes, and you've probably seen people map it out a million times, where they map out sales funnel, where they hit this page, then they hit this page, what's the conversion rate? But no one ever talks about everything else that happens. So we then started sort of mapping that out, and it became bigger and bigger and bigger until it was, oh wait, we have an entire business on paper. And I think it's quite surreal. The first time it ever happened for me, and I would say for business owners that we've worked with since, seeing your business on paper is something that doesn't usually happen, because as businesses get bigger, the paper gets bigger. So starting super early is really beneficial because it's a little bit simpler, and undertaking that later on almost seems like an impossible task. So it became something which I saw as a necessity for myself to really drive the results that I wanted. And then that obviously became something we did for other people in the businesses almost organically, because I wanted to know that information when we were investing or getting involved in the businesses. So it was something we just ended up doing for them, so that we could truly understand absolutely everything that was going on in the business, so that we could influence the changes and the operational fixes that we wanted to make, so that we could get the result that we were trying to drive in the business and evidently make money, because we never charge people for anything. So for us to make money was always through dividends and distributions of cash from our portfolio companies. So it was really important to us that we drove the result that we said we were going to drive. Otherwise, we didn't get paid. So it almost become an organic thing that we just naturally did because that's how we knew to grow the business. And then from there, I think it's become a staple in, this is one of the earliest things we do in the business. And it's become part of our process that, okay, we always start there and we always revisit it every time something changes or every time we have a problem, because if we can completely map out the business and get it on paper, we call it growing with clarity, which is once you know everything in the business and every process and how it influences every metric and every number, you have complete clarity over the business. And then you've got to play like the game of people, which is if something's breaking or not working, you can revisit the business map, as we call it, and go, okay, is it a what problem? Which is, okay, is the process broken? And if it's not, then it's probably a who problem. So then is it training? Is it just the wrong person altogether? Like what's going wrong in that? And for me, I want to play one game, which is like the people's game, which is probably the hardest game to play, but it's just one game. So having that clarity over everything else for me is just almost a peace of mind thing. And obviously it helps drive the outcome that we're trying to drive, which is always helpful.
Definitely. And when you first mapped out a business, your first time doing it, was that something you learned or heard from someone else and decided to do it? Or was it just made sense and you're like, hey, let's just put this all down on paper so we can make informed decisions?
Yeah, good question. I don't think it was something I ever learned from anywhere. It was more just taking... People talk about processes a lot, and I think it's something that gets talked about more and more over time. And it was just for me that I was very visual. So I wanted to just write it down or draw it. And I started using different softwares out there, like mapping softwares. Essentially, they're all just big whiteboards, right? It's, okay, this happens. And I think it was me being very systems and processes orientated that just decided, okay, let's include everything. I don't remember any particular point that decided, okay, I've learned this from someone. It was more just going, maybe I've learned different areas of business from different people in terms of, okay, specific finance stuff or specific CRM stuff. But the decision to actually put it on paper was just an organic decision of going, it's important for me to visualize everything and see how everything interacts between, we call it functions, which is obviously just the departments. How do these different functions interact in the business? And I just wanted to be able to see it. So I don't think it was something that was ever learned. It was more, it's been iterated time after time after again and just gradually got better and better. And it probably still will over time going forward.
Yeah, that makes sense. A lot of what you're saying now, like once you explain it, sounds so simple and obvious, but it's amazing how many people like struggle with these issues within their business. And I know it works on a case-to-case basis. And you touched on the who and the what problems, but is it possible to give like an overview or an example of the kinds of changes that you make once you've sort of mapped out a business?
Yeah, I think it's definitely case by case. So the first, if the business exists, it actually almost makes it a little bit easier because you're not designing new processes. You're going in and the first weeks or even months, depending on how complex the business is just going, okay, what exists? Let's get that on paper first. And to give an example is really difficult, but what we would do is look for dead ends. And by dead ends, I mean, okay, so if there's a if statement and the potential outcomes of this. What we're trying to do is we're going to go from A to B in terms of our initial touch points to our dream outcome. We're trying to create a path between those two things. And when we're designing these business maps and looking at something that already exists, if ever we see a dead end in terms of there's no way we get this back on track to get to dream outcome, that's something we would initially look to change. And that might be scenarios such as data flow, like the data just doesn't get to the next person to know that they need to do that, or there's some form of automated. And the only scenario where it doesn't get back on track and end up getting to that dream outcome is if someone literally tells you to go away. Like they do not want, in a B2B situation, they do not want to be a client. They've unsubscribed from everything. They've opted out of marketing. And they're the only two scenarios which we allow, which is they either become a client or they literally tell it like, we're never, ever becoming a client, or they're a bad fit, which is I think people like underestimate how much, I call it data leakage, but how much leakage there is in their business in terms of there's just things going on which you don't know about. So it's really important for us to map it out initially and find those dead ends to go, okay, well, we could get this dead end back on track if we just linked it back to the CRM, or we linked it back to another process, or we just recycled and tried again. And getting that visually on paper up front is super important, because you almost, when there's a lot going on in the business, it gets overlooked. People just forget that it's going on. And they're probably, and to give a specific example of that, maybe sort of a situation where if someone gets pushed down an email flow to rebook, but it's not linked to the CRM, and it never sort of ends that cycle where they could be a client. They haven't yet told you they don't want to be a client. They haven't yet said they do want to be a client, but they get lost somewhere in some email sequence. And you'd only understand that by mapping it out and finding out where they possibly are on this map and going, okay, well, we could have a bunch of people down here, but we have no way of getting them back on the train track to sort of dream outcome. And you would never see that until you map it out. And once you map it out, you can make that link back. And then it's important to obviously push as many people through that process as possible to work out more dead ends and work out more efficiencies that you could probably improve, and see where that data is potentially flowing and more scenarios. And it becomes that constant iteration. It's something that's never finished. As the business grows, more things come into play. As the business scales, even if it doesn't introduce new products or it's just doesn't introduce new channels, it's still something where at some point in time, if you push enough people through the process, a new scenario is going to emerge. And you need to take into account what that scenario can potentially be and build in processes to handle them.
Right. Yeah. Thanks for explaining that. That makes sense. And in terms of the word results, and I say results in inverted commas because many businesses throw that term around and say that they are driving results. But what does results actually mean to you?
Sure. Results for me in terms of, well, so the result we try to drive for a business is always going to be the end outcome, which is there's a number of like micro things we can do, but if it doesn't affect revenue and profit, then does it really matter? Like as someone who's trying to sort of grow a business, I can do a bunch of many things and I could get results in those areas, but if they don't contribute to the overall business objective, then it's just a number on a sheet. So for me, it's tracking everything that influences the big numbers and going, okay, yeah, we're gonna keep going down KPI by KPI until we get to this root number that's usually probably an action that will influence everything else. But they're the results we try to drive in terms of actual metrics, trackable, measurable things. But we also have to prove that by actioning this result and getting this number or KPI that we're trying to hit influences the big numbers at the top. Otherwise, it doesn't really matter. So for me, the big numbers that I want to influence is your valuations, your revenue, your profit. But to action them sort of effectively, I need to action a bunch of other results and drive that by just creating clarity. Well, we go, okay, if we do more of this, if we double this number at the bottom, what results is it going to drive through the business? And I think a lot of people look at results in terms of the wrong outcome. Like people are in business to make money. yeah, there's probably a bunch of other things they're trying to do. They're trying to make impact. They're trying to help specific people. But you can probably do more of that if you make more money. So it's important for me to always look at the big picture and go, okay, what is this end outcome that we're trying to achieve? And how does that affect everything else in the business? And how do we drive those results sort of in a measured way? We're not getting them by accident. We know everything that goes on the business because we've created that clarity prior with the business map and tracking the metrics in a business intelligence tool. And we go, okay, if we're driving that result, it wasn't by accident. We know everything that caused that result to happen so that we can do it again and we can do it bigger. And it's then becomes that constant A/B testing of going, okay, well, what is affecting this and what is affecting that? And how do we do more of these? And is there anything affecting these until we get to those root numbers? And once we know those root numbers, it becomes very easy to just focus on them. Okay, we do more of this, it's going to affect this, it's going to affect this, it's going to affect this. And that's really easy to sit here and say in words. And what it looks like on paper becomes really complex, but it is just keep testing until you find those numbers out, until you create that clarity and you understand every scenario. And once you get there, it does become a situation of we know what we need to do. And once you know what you need to do, you have that clarity and it becomes a lot easier. And I think a big problem for business owners is sometimes just not knowing what they actually need to do to grow. And they end up keep doing the same things over and over and over again because they think that's what they should do. And I think that's where that term of getting stuck in the business comes, rather than working on the business, which is they're never improving anything. They're just working on the things that are already in place. And that's probably where a lot of business owners get stuck.
Yeah, it's amazing that so many businesses are able to get from that 0 to 1 and they're so motivated to getting it off the ground. And then once things are sort of chugging along nicely, they don't look to have that 0 to 1 mindset again to actually take the business to the next level.
Yeah, definitely. There's two scenarios where business owners are like most productive and efficient, which is when they're raising money or they're about to go out of business. And I feel like if you took that constant testing and efficiency increase approach at all times, the businesses would grow so much faster. Like everyone has these massive goals, and you've probably seen the business decks that touch on the total addressable market is 100 billion. And if they continued with that approach, like after they got the money or after they saw a little bit of success and they continued to go, okay, well, why are we doing these things and how are we improving them and what numbers actually got us to this? Like what are the things that got us here and how can we improve them and see what is affecting them? I feel like they would continue that scale of growth. I think most businesses are not the Apples of the world and the Amazons where they already have the entire market, and to grow is really difficult. And they have to do these really innovative, massive changes. Like a business doing $1 million a year is in retrospect tiny, and you could just continue doing the same thing and grow. But you need to understand why you're doing these things and what numbers actually affected it, and keep going with that same pace that took you from 0 to something, which will take you from $1 million to 10 million and 10 million to 100 million. And I think that's the approach we try to bring to a company, which is constantly asking why, which is, why are you doing those things? Like, yes, it may have got you from 0 to where you are now, but is there something better? Like if you actually went back into the numbers and back into the processes and worked out what's doing what and how it's affecting this and how you got to where you are now, you may realize, okay, yeah, we need to double down on this exact thing. We need to do more of this particular thing, which is going to keep on influencing and we're going to keep on growing. Or you may discover something completely new, which you'd never thought before, which could revolutionize the business. But it's that constantly asking why we're doing this and revisiting the business map and going, how does this influence these big numbers and everything we're trying to achieve in the business, which is what people do at the very start. And they just don't do it halfway through because I think there's more stuff going on and they're constantly worried about today rather than absolutely everything in the business, which is, as a business owner, that becomes your job. Your job is to have that bird's eye view over the business and not be stuck as just the operator. Like sometimes you have to wear multiple hats and be the operator and the visionary and the everything else in between. But it's important to constantly be asking that question, why, so that you can get to the answers. And those answers might not be right, but at least you've tested them, and now you know if they're right or wrong because you've reported it into a metric that's told you. And I think it's that. I think marketers do this very well because they're constantly A/B testing. But if you took that approach in the entirety of your business and A/B tested and tracked and measured absolutely everything, you'd probably get to results and solutions far quicker.
Yeah, definitely. And I also think it's a sense of it's not necessarily a box ticking exercise, but you're so forward thinking and focusing on getting to the next stage that once you figure out how something works, you're like, okay, that is done. I know it works now. I'm going to focus on the next thing. Whereas, like you're suggesting, going back and looking at that thing that worked then to get you to the next stage may not be the best way to do it now.
Yeah, and I think that's part of it for us. Is a lot of business owners will go in and they'll put that process in place, like you said, and they'll go, okay, this is done. I'm going to move on to the next thing, which is so good at the start. Like at the start, when you're wearing a million different hats and you need to run and be a bit chaos, that probably is the best approach. But if you slowed down a tiny bit and went, okay, we're going to build the process, this is how this bit works. But before saying we're done, we're going to put a system in place that tracks it. And then we're going to set the benchmarks that we want to achieve based on building some sort of financial projections that go, okay, we need to hit these KPIs, which are in this process, that are going to drive us to this next result. And there's going to be a million of these different processes going on. And then as a business operator or owner, you sit there and go, okay, well, I'm maybe not going to change the process yet because I built that process, but I'm going to review the outcomes of it and review the metrics based on our benchmarks and go, at least I now know how that's affecting everything else. And then if that ever dips or maybe you need to revisit the benchmark, at least you can then see the metrics and you can decide, okay, now I need to go back and now I need to ask why. And I think that's the difference. Is it's very difficult to ask why on 100 different processes at a time in a business because there's just simply too much going on. But if you can look at the metric and pick which ones you need to ask why on, because they're influencing other things, you can pick the battles in the business right, which is maybe my job initially when going into a business, which is there may be 100 things to change, there may be 5, but picking the right battles which have the most leverage and are going to grow the business the most early on is what I need to do, because then I can influence business growth and we can have more profit, which, okay, we've got more profit, we've got more revenue, we can drive resources back in the business and I can tackle more problems at once, which is really important, which is, again, going back to that, what is the end goal? Well, the end goal is make money. If you make money, guess what? You have more resources now to figure more problems out. You can get more efficient. You can reinvest in different areas of the business rather than just fixing something for the sake of fixing it, which, yeah, you can understand why, and you can try and make a process a tiny bit more efficient, which I'm always going to do. I love efficiency. It's something which I nerd out over, but I also need to understand why. Like, okay, if I increase this metric by 10%, how is that going to affect everything else? Whereas if I increase this metric by 1%, is it going to have a bigger impact? And what things can I change with this process that are going to do that? Or what things can I change with this process? What is the easier problem to tackle and what's going to have the biggest sort of outcome in the end? And that's a decision process that can't be made if you're too in the weeds and you're just worried about running the day-to-day and fixing the fires that are coming up. So it's important to, again, have it all mapped out, have the metrics easy to visualize, see where they're associated in terms of what functions and how they're going to affect those overall big goals. And once you have all of those things in place, it becomes easy to pick those battles. Whereas before you could end up running around like a headless chicken, constantly just trying to find things to change for the sake of changing.
Yeah, exactly. And what do you look for in a founder when deciding whether you want to work with them or not?
It's actually interesting. I almost look for the opposite of me. So I would say I'm fairly organized. Obviously, the whole getting it on paper, doing the mapping, etc. I love an idea person, someone who has crazy ideas, and I can almost remove them from the day to day and put them in that true position of being a visionary. Like, I love someone who's a visionary and just pulls wacky ideas out of like just nowhere, it seems to me, and then let them get it from 0 to 1 in terms of just prove a concept. And then my job becomes, okay, well, how do I then, they've proved that concept. How do I make it happen 100 times? How do I make it happen super efficient? How do I build it into our processes with everything else going on in the business? So for me, I've heard a founder call himself this before and did a LinkedIn post on it, which was when they're almost chaos. They've got so many ideas going on at once, and they're running in so many different directions. And my job becomes just make that as efficient as possible. Make that concept from idea to business process really quick, and build it into everything else that's going on and allow us to report on it. So it becomes the opposite of me. Other characteristics I'd almost look for is it's optimism. Like, going big is possible. There's nothing actually stopping you from competing at the top level, being the biggest in your industry. Like, it's a learning curve, yes, and there's things I definitely don't know, otherwise I'd be doing bigger, and there's things even the people at the top don't know. But having that optimism that it's possible is so important, because then they're on board with really getting critical, like particular about the metrics we want to track, and going, okay, well, yeah, we can achieve this if we keep doing this. And then combining that optimism with the ideas that they spit out and the operations that we bring to the table has always been just a really good mix that has seemed to work well.
And how important is the actual idea for the business and this whole process?
I feel like I have a little bit of a controversial opinion on this, which is the idea, unless you're trying to invent something new, which we've been involved in businesses which are trying to invent new stuff, where the idea is super important. But in a traditional business, and especially first-time founders, I would say the idea is keep it simple. Like, the idea does not need to be this massive AI invention that does a million different things that no one's ever heard of, because the likelihood is it probably isn't going to work. Whereas like starting a simple business that's been done a million times and putting your own twist on it, having your own unique selling points is important, but the idea doesn't necessarily matter. It's always going to be about the execution. And I feel like that's a term which is thrown around in the VC world and in all investor worlds, is this whole disruptive thing. Like, I'm going to build a disruptive business. Whereas, and I heard a term, I can't remember who said it, which is like, disruption is not about the product and the idea. It's about the distribution. Like, your business is not disruptive until you've distributed it. So at the start, and when first time founders don't have a ton of resources to be able to go and be disruptive, I feel like keep that idea really simple, nail the basics, get it growing. And I mean, you'll see it just as much as I do. There's some boring businesses out there which are giants.
Yeah.
Their idea is not crazy. It's just a simple idea that they've executed on really well, and they've managed to be disruptive because they've just distributed really efficiently. And yeah, are you going to turn an idea from 0 to £1 billion overnight with a boring idea? Probably not. But how many innovative ideas that are crazy out there fail? A lot. And if you don't have the resources to back that, or you've got a big VC backing you and you can really test and be that disruptive person, I would argue the idea is not that important, as long as it's not wild.
Well, I think that makes perfect sense. I think it's a more realistic view, whereas I think a lot of people paint this picture in their heads of starting a business. It has to be this new innovative idea because it is starting a business. And entrepreneurship is also sort of looked at through that lens where it's like, wow, amazing, shiny object syndrome type thing, where it's like, if your main objective is to make money, and like you said, if you want to make an impact, the first step is making money anyway. Rather do something that you know will make money, and then go from there. Maybe that business does take off, and you can start bringing the innovation into it and disrupting. But you need the means to actually disrupt. And if you're at a point where you're just starting out, then rather get from 0 to 1.
Yeah. And it's going to work for some people, like having that crazy idea and going out and giving it. And if that is what they truly, truly believe in, and it has got a purpose behind it, I'm all for it. Like, go for it. I'm an entrepreneur at heart, which is that everything is possible. Like if you actually sit down and do it, it's possible. But my advice to people in the past when they've come and asked me directly has always been, nail something basic first. You'll get a bit of business, especially if this has always been for first time founders where they've not really had a business before, is just nail something basic at first, get the business experience and business concepts like under your belt, and then go and nail this massive idea that you have, because you'll have a bit of resources behind you, you'll have had some experience, you would have known what to do when times are rough, because like business is not sunshine and rainbows. It's putting out fires endlessly and optimizing things that go wrong, and the outcome, and it's painted as a really great picture, but it also has the bad times. And I think getting that experience as a first-time founder in something that's a little bit more simple, where you're not constantly worried about going under as a business, means that when you have that second time round go at this massive idea, which is a bit innovative and probably is no one's really done it before, I feel like you have more chance of success. And there's probably a statistic around second-time founders. I feel like someone's told me a statistic recently on second-time founders, where you are more likely to succeed.
I think I've heard a statistic along those lines too. But what motivates you to do work like this?
I love it. Like I truly love it. I was that typical entrepreneur when you start, I want to retire at 25 and do nothing and live on a beach, which is a bit controversial considering the background. But I like realized that that's not what I wanted at all. And I just truly love optimizing things and seeing the outcome. Like seeing the outcome is the best thing when you've made some tiny little tweak. And I say that's my motivation. And I obviously I have like small motivators. Like if someone comes to me and they've got a business idea and they are truly committed to it, I want to help them make that happen. Obviously committing my time to it is going to have some cost, just because I've got to be sort of careful with my own resource allocation. But there is those smaller impacts, and I want to make money. Like I never avoid the fact I want to be rich, and I've always done this to get rich and get richer so I can do more of it, which is invest in more businesses, have more impact, employ more people to be able to go out and do more businesses. But if I stripped it back to what it truly is, like I love it. It is, I find it fun. I enjoy every single day. And I will do it forever. And I think that sustainability, knowing that you'll do it forever, is really important.
Yeah, I feel like that is very important. And now I want to sort of shift a bit and go back a few years and uncover how this all started. How did you go straight into entrepreneurship out of school? Did you ever consider a normal job at all?
I had little jobs here and there when I was testing things and they weren't going so well. Like I was a swimming teacher at school, which I loved, by the way, like absolutely loved. But I was always testing ideas, always, from like, not like some entrepreneurs, you hear them talk and they were like testing things at like 10. I'd say like I really started testing things at like 14, 15, 16 up, like that kind of age. I always knew I wanted to be like run my own business from very, very young. I never knew what that was. And I probably still didn't know what it was until I fell into what I do now. But I was just always testing things. And I feel like that's how I started business outside of school. Was I was doing it while there. Like I was already thinking about ideas. I never had that issue of worrying what was possible, which was I believed in myself. I always knew eventually I would do it. So it was that mindset of, okay, well, if I'm eventually going to do it, I'm going to do it now. And I'll just keep testing things. And that is really just how it started and just continued to go. I mean, obviously I'm not that old. I'm 24 now. So it's only been a short time since I like left school. But I had that decision in sixth form whether to go to university, and I just knew it wasn't for me. Like I always wanted to run my own business, and the only way was to get out and do stuff. And yeah, I needed stuff to pay for bills at that time, but in the evenings I was working on something. It might not have been good, and most of them definitely weren't because they turned out to be nothing. But I was working on something, and then eventually when I started seeing a bit of success, it was just double down on that. Keep working hard, put in the hours, and it'll pay off. And I think that's that whole. I saw another video recently which was about most of it's just showing up. If you just do it every single, like deciding to do it is very easy. Like, and I think it was Alex Hormozy actually. It was his example was the gym, which was it's very easy to decide I'm going to go to the gym 3 days a week. I'm going to eat this. I'm going to do this. But actually doing it for 3 years is tough. And I think that's one of my superpowers is I'll just show up. Like I will work 12 to 16 hours on a Sunday if it's needed. I'm in a position now where I can probably never work again, but I still do 12-hour days, day in, day out, and I will continue to do that day in, day out. It helps. I love it because I don't see it as work. I see it as enjoyment, but I'll put in the time, and I'll put in the time for 20 years if I need to. And I think that's part of it, which was going back to that childhood thing is I just knew that I would put in the time and I would keep on doing it and I would do it now. A lot of people are waiting for that optimum time to start. It never comes. It never comes where you are in the best possible position to start a business or do a particular thing. You just kind of need to throw yourself in the deep end and do it. And my view on it was, what's the worst that can happen? Like, the worst that can happen is I failed and I went and got a job, and at that job, I'd have probably tried again. So for me, it was just, okay, well, if I'm going to do it now, I'm going to do it. And like at AC, and I'm going to keep going and keep going and keep going until something works. So it was never a question of when to start. It was start as soon as I could.
But I feel like that mindset that you had and like the drive and the self-confidence is so important to especially learn at such a young age. But how did you come to those conclusions? Because I feel like people who are 16 years old are very reliant on external factors too. That they don't come to those conclusions where like it's fully up to me. If I start right now, I'll be able to make it. Like, how did you come to that conclusion on your own at such a young age?
I was always very competitive. I played a lot of sports. I believed in myself a lot. I had a teacher once tell me that I could be whatever I wanted to be. And that was them giving me criticism because they were saying I wasn't trying. But then I took that. I was like, oh, well, yeah, if I actually put my mind to it, I probably could do it. And then I'd say the motivation thing. Motivation's very short term. Like discipline is always going to outweigh motivation because discipline will last longer. But to get the motivation, like the good thing now is I'd say there's a lot of kids that want to, like at 16 now, who want to start businesses. It's a lot more almost popular. So like finding a group of people who also want to start businesses. They don't necessarily need to be doing the same thing as you, but get in a room with them, spend time with them, like motivate each other. And that self-belief for me has always been, most people have self-belief, but then the people that don't have self-belief, it's less a lack of self-belief and more a fear of failure. And I definitely had that fear of failure, but that motivated me. It was like, okay, well, I do not want to fail. I don't want to be seen as a failure. I don't want to tell people about my failures, which now I tell people openly about the failures because I actually find them funny. But back then I definitely didn't want to. Whereas I used that as like fuel. Okay, well, I better keep going because I don't want to be seen as this failure. If this thing doesn't work, I'm just going to keep going until something works. I think now doing that in a group of people, like I wish I'd done that in a group of people when it was just me. And now I just actively do. I always have friends around. I've got friends with me here. I'll go and visit friends in different countries, which it is obviously open to me now. But I'm always trying to surround myself with people who are doing things, because then that's like that little bit of short-term motivation to go, it is possible. Like, and that kind of drives group self-belief if you don't have that internal, like singular self-belief.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And that's actually one of the reasons why I started this podcast, to have conversations like people like you. I'm almost forcing myself to surround myself with people who have gone out and done it and achieved things. Just so it almost switches that social conditioning where, you're reliant on other people, or you think you got to climb a corporate ladder type thing, and then you make that mindset shift of like, you can just do it on your own because look at all these other people doing it.
Yeah. And that's also like, I had a conversation with someone the other day. I mean, I am not a crypto. I don't really understand it as well as some people do. But I was having a debate with someone, and they were saying how they have a relatively successful business, but they were looking at crypto specifically, like the meme coins and stuff, and they were looking at what I would call the get rich quick scheme.
Yeah.
And we actually broke the maths down, which is like, okay, most people who are like in these get rich quick schemes can only put like £500, £1,000 in. And if it 1000x's like the big ones do, you're going to make 500,000 to £1 million. And I broke it down to him with his business as an example, but I would break it down to most people and go, if you stuck your head down and focused on a business, you could do that in a year. And you wouldn't have to get this lucky lottery like ticket in some sort. So just for him, it was okay. Focus on what you're doing. Like you have something good going on. Start like double down on it. Put some more effort in. You can get to that, and you'll make far more money than what you would by hitting a lucky lottery. And I say that is the only problem I see of all these people starting to get into entrepreneurship is they think they've got to get lucky and hit big on something. Whereas like, if you just did something basic and you figured it out and you convince one person to give you money in like a B2B scenario, and you just figure out how to do that a ton, you can make way more money than getting lucky on some crypto coin. Now, obviously, there's other things in crypto that I just don't understand. I'm sure there's some, like, and that's a business in itself. But a lot of people look at it like a lottery. And they look at these new AI things as like a lottery and all the sort of hype, the trends and stuff. And there's nothing wrong with jumping on trends if you've got a legitimate business. But looking at them as a get-rich-quick scheme is just a recipe for me to just fail over and over and over again, and not really ever get any tangible results, which is where that bad like image of entrepreneurship comes from, which is, oh, it's just so tough. People fail and fail and fail. That stat around 99% of businesses fail. And I always question that stat and go, okay, well, how many of those people actually tried? Like if you actually gave 100% and tried, I would argue that more people would succeed than fail.
Yeah, I think that's such a valuable insight. Definitely. And I'd like to touch on a company you've successfully exited called Rebills. What is Rebills and how does it work?
Sure. So yeah, we still own a portion of Rebills, but we exited the majority of it. It was a checkout business with a subscription management suite. So what we would do is we would host the checkout page of like B2B e-commerce businesses. And we had a bunch of tools built into a back-end subscription management system, which would allow people to upsell into subscriptions. The idea came from my co-founder, who wanted this on a business that he ran. And he started the business and sort of got it off the ground almost. And it was almost like an agency. Like it was, we would do what we had figured out for other people manually. And it was like time consuming and it was painful. And then it became could we build our own software? Like, could we look into the market and like, there was all these inefficiencies in other softwares and you were linking multiple things. And it was, could we just build our own? And that was maybe that first like example of self-belief of going, well, yeah, actually we can. Like, why can't we? Like someone else is going to do it. So why don't we make it us? And we started building a software and we started getting traction there and we doubled down on getting more customers. And then it became this big thing. And if I'm being honest, at the end, when we exited the business, I didn't want to exit. I thought it had more legs, but my business partners did want to exit. And then we ended up making the group decision that we would. And we exited that business. And now we're still moving on to the next thing and the next thing. But people see that as you see it on LinkedIn and you see it on like profiles and you go, okay, well, it was a successful exit. But you don't realize that like at the start, it was just some like idea that came from a problem we had, and we just believed in ourselves that, do you know what, we could actually do it. And we invested no money in the business. So we didn't do it with massive investment. We didn't do it with any backing. We never raised money, and we just over time grafted and grafted and grafted. And I'm thankful to my business partners that they also were in that same mindset I am. They're both very skilled in what they do. And we just kept going. And it was like compounding over time and getting slightly better and becoming better at running businesses. And we just weren't scared of failure really ever, because it was okay, if we fail, is it going to burn the house down? No. Okay, well, it's like we learned from it, and then we would do it better the month after that, and then revenues would go up and things like that. And there's definitely things we didn't get right, otherwise it would have been a bigger business, but we now learned from them and we'll implement them in the next one. And I think that was it. It was just like we're all young, so we're all 24, and it was 24-year-old guys just decided to start a business based on a problem. And that's usually like when people come to me and they go, oh, what should I start? I usually tell them to look at their own scenarios, like if they have a job, or they're in a particular community, or they understand an industry really well. Just look at your own problems. Like, what problems do you have, or what problems do the people around you have? And like, if you just sat there for an hour and just tried to think of as many problems as you could and just wrote them down, and then go, okay, well, what would solve that? What would solve that? What would solve that? And try and come up with a couple of different scenarios on each of the problems. You've probably found a really good business idea. And I think a lot of people have business ideas and they just don't go, all right, let's do it. Right. And someone said to me, I think it was yesterday actually, there was an idea I had about a month ago, and the business now exists. The business now exists. It's in development. It has a name. It has a first customer. And we're building a software around it. And it was, how do you take it from that to that in such a short amount of time? And it now, obviously it helps now we have resources, but I would take the same approach if I was starting out, which is just go, okay, if you've got an idea, just test it. Like, just go and try it. What's the worst that can happen? You realize it was a crap idea and you scrap it and you try one of your other ideas. Give it enough time to really, really like try it. And if you truly believe in the idea, keep doubling down, maybe get some more like extra opinions to make sure you're not just building something that's just for you. But if you've done all those things, just go. Like, you have nothing to lose, and you have everything to gain.
Yeah, that's so important. I feel like that point needs to be hammered home more frequently. But what would you say are the most valuable lessons or valuable lesson that you learned from starting Rebuilds?
From starting Rebuilds, definitely anything is possible. Anything is possible. Like, we created things I never thought we'd create. And when I look back at the product, I just go like, I can't believe that's ours, kind of thing. Like, put yourself out there. Obviously, it taught me things about what I do now and the business operations, about just keep getting granular, get granular over and over and over again. The battle is never finished. Like, and be proud of that. Like, it's okay to just keep like striving for efficiency and like trying to grow and have these outrageously big goals. That's okay. Like, just keep going at that. I think it taught me about community. Like, having the business partners was so helpful. Like, we would sit in rooms like this, like online, and we'd just sit there for hours and just work and talk and throw ideas at each other. And we were so honest to each other. Like, if an idea came out and it was like awful, we'd tell each other. And if an idea was great, we'd sit there and we'd talk about it. And then we'd implement so fast. And I think that was the thing. It was like speed. Just implement, just keep going. Like, if you get it wrong, you get it wrong. Like, and the bigger you get as a company, you can afford to get more things wrong. And that was it. Like, once we had resources behind us, we would just test like crazy, and we'd waste money. In honesty, we'd waste money because we would test as many things as possible. But we just knew that if something worked and we doubled down on it, we'd make back all the losses that we'd made on testing these other things. And at that point in the business, we had the money to do that. But you have that at the start, just in smaller increments, and you can just do bigger tests later on. And I'd say Reveal's taught me stuff like that, like speed and believing what's possible, like having an idea and going, do you know what, we could do that. It is the biggest thing, and that's what I now take into other businesses, which is if we have an idea and I truly believe in it, and it helps, we've had the experience from before, we just go, like, yeah, let's do it. Like, no questions asked, let's do it. What do we need to make that happen? All right, here are those things, make it happen, and then review the results afterwards. And it's that whole, like, just do it. Just do it and give it a test and see what happens after. And I mean, I wonder, like, I'd ask you as well, like, when you started your podcast, what made you start? Like, and because you just started, right? I guess it's,
Well, it was
you have to start.
Yeah, it was a self-identity thing because I'd really struggled with coming up with ideas and not doing anything about it and getting really frustrated with myself. And I saw the podcast as being one of those ways where I was almost outsourcing something to hold me accountable, because I was on my own and I wasn't really bouncing ideas or people or like talking to people to go into business with them or anything like that. So I didn't have that sort of accountability partner, but I knew I needed some sense of that to stay consistent and hold myself accountable. And when you start out, although there aren't many people watching or listening, your friends and family still know that you've committed to this thing. And I just come up with arbitrary rules, like I'm going to post an episode once a week for this whole year. And now people aren't going to be checking in with me if I miss an episode, but I'm going to be upset with myself if I miss an episode. And so I sort of just created that sense of accountability, and it just got the ball rolling. It was like, oh shit, I need to find guests for the next week, and like I just have to do it. And it sort of had that snowball effect, and now now it's like 25 or 6 episodes later. So yeah,
I like that. I think there's definitely something in putting it out to the world that you're doing it is scary, because then you have that, you put it out there, like you have that accountability, whether it's accountability, and maybe that's a bad thing as well, in terms of like you're almost creating the fear of embarrassment. Like you're going, okay, well, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it well, and then if you stop, it's that, oh, why did you stop?
And you touched on an Alex Hormozy quote, and I think it's one of his more recent videos about how we're not actually afraid of failure itself. We're afraid of what people will think of us when we fail. And so adding that public factor to it, sort of, that's where the real fear is. And so it helps hold yourself accountable.
Especially for youngsters as well. Like if people really looked at what they had to lose, you don't have much. And when you're 16, you have nothing to lose. Nothing. Like, all the upside is there. Okay, when you're older, maybe you have a little bit to lose. You maybe have a mortgage. But if you really, really, really figured it out, you could. And then that becomes a how bad do you want it situation. Like, how bad do you actually want it? Like, when is the last time you dedicated 100% effort to something? And if you've ever dedicated 100% effort to something, did it work out? And I'd argue that most of the time, if you dedicated 100% effort to something, it kind of works out. Like, I don't know many people that have done it and it's not worked out. It may not have worked out in the time frame you wanted it to, but eventually it did. So I'm a big advocate for just start a business. Just go for it. If that's what you want to do, go for it.
I agree. And one thing before we finish off that I just wanted to touch on is you've mentioned community and like the power of community and your connections. How did you go about finding that sort of community and tribe of business founders to work with?
Yeah. Do you know, it was almost a friendship thing, and it was not thinking too much on it. Like, I feel like people join communities and they try and make it's forced, right? It's forced. We're a community of business founders. Whereas for me, a lot of the people I hang around with and interact with they're friends. Yes, they're in business. And yes, we have those similarities and things in common, but we're friends and we catch up as friends and we talk about business because that's what we're interested in. But it's organic. I introduce you to this person because I think you'll like each other, and it's nothing more than that. And it's I get invited to dinners and events, and like fortunately now I fly all over the world to meet people. But it's always just we're meeting as friends and we're catching up and we're talking about interesting things we're doing. And then because those friendships are real, they last, I would say. And then it almost accidentally forms a little community where rather than having the intention of going, okay, this is a community. Because I've never really been big into the whole community thing. I'm not in many like LinkedIn communities and things like that. I'd rather have like the real friendships. Because I know that then they'll last, and it's maybe also a thing that I know that I won't give to a community if I'm not fully invested in it. Whereas with a friend, yeah, cool, call me up. I'll give you like let's meet up. And then it becomes that real approach where I know I'll give because it's real for me. And if it's real for them, they'll give value, and that whole like value exchange thing. It's less of that and just it's organic. It's just real experiences of what we've got going on. And if someone learns something from it, great. If they don't, and we just have a nice dinner or a catch up, that's also fine.
Great. And I know you already asked me a question a bit earlier, but I usually end my episodes handing over the mic and asking whether you have a question for me.
Yeah, I guess. So obviously you speak to a lot of business owners in different industries and probably stages of their business career. If you were going to start a business now, based on, I guess, all the people you've spoken to or your own experiences, what characteristics would you look for in a co-founder almost?
I think I'm more similar to you in terms of like structure and having everything organized and finding what drives results and actually like going down into the nitty gritty. And so I'd probably look for someone who's more that idea person who is just ready to run with ideas and just go type thing. And also someone maybe more on, because I never had any experience with sales. And that was one of the reasons why I started this podcast, was to just sort of get better at just like speaking to people and speaking about these topics. But I feel like that's not my strong suit. And so I'd want to get someone who's just like can talk the pants of anyone and like sell a product. And so that's the kind of co-founder I think I'd look for. Basically all my weaknesses is what I'd look for.
Yeah, I don't think that's a bad thing. Like I often on interview questions ask like what people's weaknesses are, because I feel like if you're aware enough to know what they are, it's probably a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. And so thank you so much for joining me today, Dan. I really, really enjoyed our conversation. And I look forward to following the rest of your journey. I feel like you've only just begun. So if people want to find out more about Sonorous and you, how can they do so?
I guess we'll give some links in places or on LinkedIn. And then, or I am always open for a chat. That's one thing I'd always say is message me on LinkedIn. We'll chat. And again, it'll be that open communication. Like it's not going to be scripted or anything like that. It will be open and honest.
Awesome. Great. I'll put those links in the show notes. And thanks again, Dan. Chat soon. Thanks for listening. I really appreciate you making it all the way to the end. I hope you enjoyed the episode. One more quick reminder before you go. I have a weekly newsletter by the same name, Another Excuse, where I cover 4 topics: something that has changed my perception, a tool that could be useful to you, content that is actually worth consuming, and a concept that I try break down and explain. If this sounds of any interest to you and you need a kick up the arse, then you can subscribe at the link below. Thanks for joining me again, and I'll see you next week.